So just to kick things off, is it even possible, do you think, for a nation state, for Britain to sue Trump in another country in the way that our Ed Davey seems to be suggesting we can?
Well, I think it's an interesting suggestion. It is not possible for a sovereign state, so to speak, to sue an individual in the United States. First of all, there's no standing and there would be no jurisdiction. But what the UK could do is they could bring a case against the United States. And there are a couple ways you can do that. You can actually sue the United States and I guess therefore the administration in the International Court of Justice, or they could actually file a dispute in the World Trade Organization. That's probably the easier way to go if you were to bring an action in the International Court of Justice. That would have to be in a treaty that the US and the UK had, that somehow we've agreed to consent to that court, or we'd have to just literally consent to that jurisdiction. So neither one of those things is probably going to happen. I'm not aware of any treaty between the U.S. and the U.K. where the U.S., not in modern times, has agreed to consent to the International Court of Justice. But we have seen disputes in the World Trade Organization where the UK has said, look, these tariffs, these other things, these other policies that the US is doing is not fair. And we have seen that there have been agreements or resolutions of those disputes. And one of the resolutions was that the UK challenged the U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs. And that resolution was the fact that there were countermeasures imposed. So we could do that. But I don't think that the UK could actually bring a suit against Donald Trump directly. I did read an article that, Sir Ed wanted to do this, and I think it's interesting. And Trump is accustomed to lawsuits. In fact, he's brought many lawsuits and he's had many lawsuits brought against him. But in this instance, a country would not be able to sue him individually.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you're being very charitable to describe it as interesting. I think he's kind of making up as he goes along, to be fair. But being anti-Trump is kind of all the Lib Dems have to say about themselves. But if we were talking about some kind of dispute, whether it was in the World Trade Organization or through some other sort of mechanism, surely this would take years, though. I mean, these kind of big supranational institutions, they don't necessarily move very quickly. I mean, could this even be resolved with the kind of speed that the government over here would probably want it to be resolved in?
Well, I think the most efficient way to resolve this type of dispute would not be in the courts, as you say. I think the fastest way to do that would be to reach an agreement. And as a matter of fact, the U.S. and the U.K. have already reached an agreement for tariffs, or for most of the products and goods and services, for 10%. As you know, Donald Trump, immediately after the United States Supreme Court decided against him on this decision and said, you can't do this, he immediately said, well, I'm going to do it, but I'll do it under another statute. And he used the Trade Act to do that. And he specifically used Section 122 of the Trade Act to do it. And in fact, Kavanaugh, in his dissent, outlined different ways Trump could do it, and he did do it. And now he is imposing a 15%. So I think the best way for the UK to proceed, or any other country who has a problem with these tariffs, is to try to reach an agreement. And if I were the UK or the Prime Minister, I would approach the US, I would approach Trump, and I would say, look, we have an agreement already for the 10%. Does this still stand? We are hoping that it does. We bargained for this, and we are hoping that you stand by your agreement. So I think that's the best way for the UK to proceed in this instance.
And it's part of the problem here that ever since this new tariff regime came in, it's clearly been used by Trump as a way to try and get countries, whether it's the UK or whether it's more hostile countries, to do what he wants. I mean, can we even really negotiate from any kind of position of fairness if this is largely about Trump trying to decide what British policy might be in relation to all kinds of things? I mean, surely this is more about the politics of it rather than just coming to some kind of fair trading arrangement.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it is very political, and there's a lot that is being done by this administration that is very political, whether you see it with the tariffs or immigration or other policies here. And I do think the tactic from this administration is to be very strong and to have sort of a dictatorship approach to these policies instead of negotiating them or doing it by the Constitution or abiding by certain laws or certain policies that have been in the past, certain, actions that other presidents have taken. We've seen Donald Trump, and people say that, it's unpresidential and that, we've not seen precedent for any of this before. And I think the other world powers would probably agree we haven't seen anything like this before. He has said that the reason for these tariffs is, he wants to make sure that he brings back, make America great again. He wants to see that, products and services are started here and that we're not relying on other countries and that, the trade deficit would be better if, in fact, he had these tariffs. The reality here in the United States is, of course, the tariffs are imposed upon those who are importing goods. The people importing, the companies importing those goods are companies here in America, and the prices have been passed down to the consumer, and we have seen prices go up. So it's really not a positive situation as far as the market is concerned, but we continue to see Trump say that this is part of his overall economic plan, and he wants this to be implemented, and he's very upset with the Supreme Court for not allowing him to do it, and he's looking for other ways to do it. He said, as a matter of fact, if he can't get it done under the Emergency Economics Powers Act, which is what he was using, he's going to do it under this Section 122, and there are other sections he could use. Section 122 is saying basically you can impose these remedial tariffs if, in fact, there's some sort of domestic market disruption. But there are other sections of that act that say you can use it for national security, you could use it for, unfair trade practices. And so he's going to keep trying to impose these tariffs until he is able to actually have them, keep them, and move on in the future against these other countries.
And just finally, Terry, this blanket 15% tariff, which has just been announced. My understanding is that will be in place, 150 days, if I know correctly. What happens after that? Is it all just back to the beginning again, or what could Trump do after that time limit is run out?
Excellent point. And the Congress would have to approve it after 150 days. It could stay if the Congress approved it. If it's not approved, then back to square one. Right now, with the votes in Congress, we have a lot of Republicans who are not exactly in favor of these tariffs. So right now, Trump would not have the vote to have the 15%. And we'd go back to where we were. And hopefully, there would be some agreements between the countries as to whether or not these tariffs could be opposed versus Trump just unilaterally opposing, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% tariffs against various countries.
Thank you so much, Terry. That was Terry Austin, legal analyst and attorney, bringing us the latest on Trump's trade war and how it affects us here in the UK.